All right, Steph, we've got 60 seconds to do a quick intro. I'm going to throw 10 questions at you. You ready? All right. Instagram or TikTok?
Instagram.
If you could time travel, where and when would you go?
Oh, back to the early 90s.
Night owl or early bird?
Early bird.
Video or podcast?
Podcast.
Agency or solopreneur?
Solo.
What do you love about where you grew up?
Oh, which place did I grow up? Because I grew up in a few places. The scenery.
What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading a book called Quit.
Okay. What's your favourite place you've travelled to recently?
Recently, France.
And what's the most adventurous thing you've ever done?
Start a business.
Steph, thank you for coming on. The first question I wanted to ask is, what are the immeasurable things that have impacted your business and life? You've had to make a decision, you haven't really known what the outcome would be, but you did it anyway.
Probably the biggest one I'd say would be connections, the people that have been influential on that journey. So like the friends who, when I've been on the fence about a decision, who've helped me, who've listened to me as I've talked through it, who've held my hand through it sometimes. Definitely the people. I think that's been probably one of the biggest immeasurable parts of business. You know, like you've had these as well, the low points where you just want to give up on your business and you're like, oh, this is the worst. I can't keep doing this. And then the friend that calls you to say, well, actually, you know, what would happen if you tried this? Or what if you did this differently? And then also the great high points in your business where I've realized during the pandemic when I was living by myself and my business grew really quickly, having nobody with me to celebrate those big moments, that's made me realize, oh, like the successes, the wins, all of the things don't matter as much as the people who are there when you are celebrating them. So
what do you do when someone makes that call to you? Like, what is the best advice when you're on the other side?
It so depends on the situation. I mean, there are times when, yeah, people maybe should quit. And actually the book that I'm reading at the moment called Quit is about the, you know, knowing when to stay the course, knowing when to pivot, knowing when to completely quit and try something different. And that doesn't always mean, you know, quit your business completely. It might be remove a part of your business and focus on something else. It might mean removing something that's taking a lot of your time so you can double down on the things that are actually creating those results. So the advice that I give is not always keep going, keep going, keep going, because in some cases that's actually probably not the best advice. In Quit, the author talks about how in climbing Everest in the story Into Thin Air, you hear about the people who persisted and then ended up dying because they couldn't make it back down in time. But you don't hear about the 3 guys who decided to turn around an hour and a half before their turnaround time for the day because they realized we're not going to make it. Let's do what's best for our safety.
Yeah.
So we celebrate the people who persist, but we don't celebrate the people who actually realize this isn't working or something needs to change. Let me turn around and do that. So I'd love to say that, yeah, I'm always optimistic and like, yeah, keep going. But there are times when I have had to be like, well, maybe this isn't the right path for you. Maybe have you considered doing something different? Have you considered what it would look like, let's say, in your business to remove the part of it that's causing you pain, that's uncomfortable, that you don't enjoy doing?
Is the problem like how we process sunk cost fallacy?
I think a huge part of it is. I think it's also like how we as a society frame or think about quitting. We don't think of it as a good thing. We think of it as like, oh, you failed. And especially in business where we're told right from day one, 9 out of 10 businesses fail in the first year. However many % don't make it to 5 years. Not many make it to 10, like even fewer make it to 10. So we think, well, I can't be a statistic. I've got to keep going. And anything other than persisting on that same path is perceived to be failure. So we avoid that. When actually sometimes failing's been great. The best thing I could have done was close down the agency business I was trying to build to focus on the business that I have now. And at the time, it felt a little bit like I was admitting defeat, a little bit like, oh, I failed. But now that actually opened up space then for me to focus on the stuff that I enjoyed and to create a successful business that was a lot better than the first one.
Yeah. Is it that space like, how do you process things when things are out of control and you've got so much going on? How do you take that step back and create that space?
Oof. I mean, how do I practically do that? I definitely use things like journaling. I talk it through with my psychologist, who has become my verbal vomit dumping ground at times when I need to think through those decisions. I think it's whatever, like when we're in that situation, when we're in it so deeply and all the thoughts are just whirring around, for me, the best thing has been just writing them down on paper. That helps me to structure it and organize it and realize, like, oh, I'm telling myself that if I stop doing this thing, I'm going to let down these people. But in actual fact, I'm probably not letting them down that much. They'll be fine. So then it makes it less of a terrible, scary decision to go and remove that thing.
Yeah. Cutting bait, making these choices, pivoting, we call them lots of different things. And I don't know, like, when I've reflected on it, I know that there's no crystal ball. There's no perfect outcome. And you also can't be in two different places at once. I mean, and so a lot of the time you have to take ownership of the decisions you make, but also realize sometimes there aren't any perfect decisions. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we've jumped straight in. Tell everyone who doesn't know about your business, man.
Yes, so I'm an online business strategist. I work with online business owners, predominantly what I call solo experts. So your nutritionists, your lawyers, your copywriters, your designers, the people who've been working with clients and they've built maybe a reasonably sized business on delivering services, but they've hit a bit of a ceiling. And I help them to take the expertise that's in their brain and then sell that at scale in a way that allows them to build a business that doesn't just require them at their laptop all the time. Because you've been there, I've been there. When you're trading your time for money all the time, it gets really stressful really quickly. It's great at the start when you're like, oh, I'm no longer working in a job, and you send that first invoice out and you get paid the first time and you're like, I can make this work outside of a job. But eventually when your income's so dependent on the time that you are spending on each client, it can get really, really stressful, really tiring.
So what's at the core of I guess that change that you get these business owners to go through?
It's moving mainly from a one-on-one or a one to, I guess, one-on-one's probably the best way to explain it. One-on-one to a one-to-many kind of model. So adding in some kind of leveraged income. It doesn't mean you don't ever have to do one-on-one ever again. If you want to keep doing one-on-one, if you enjoy doing it, keep doing that. But it also means having other income streams in there, say a course, a program, a membership, anything where you're able to deliver that expertise, deliver the process that you can help somebody to, or you can walk somebody through to get the outcome that they want, in a format that's not just my time in equals my income out.
Yeah. So how do you get clients? How does it actually, tell us about how it works for you?
Oh, it's interesting because it's changed a lot in the last few years. Honestly, the getting clients part now is probably the easiest part. We're constantly running Facebook ads. There's always paid traffic going on in the background. I've been podcasting for nearly 800 episodes since 2018 now, and that's become just a lead generator in itself. So at the start, I was doing a lot of going to events, commenting in the Facebook groups, engaging with people, building those relationships. Not so much anymore, because it now has created that snowball effect where it grows organically. Yes, I could put a lot more time and effort into getting more clients, growing my audience, but I don't want to build a massive empire. Yeah.
Well, you've built a brand over time off the back of your content. I'm interested in going into some detail on your Facebook strategy and your meta strategy. Is it predominantly meta ads? And do you then have a funnel that you move people through? How does it work?
Yeah, so I've got several funnels that have taken 7 years of refining and building and all of the things. So predominantly, most of the ads that we run are to either lead magnets like an ebook or a workbook, or free masterclasses that are either live or pre-recorded. And then once somebody gets into that funnel, they typically will get an email sequence. And then a couple of times a year, I will do live launches of my 2 biggest programs. I've also just recently launched a membership, which every month it's open for a couple of days. So during those days, my email list gets a couple of emails and they can join. Otherwise, they can wait until the next month to join.
So you've got a couple of different lead gens in a couple of different ways. Is there one that works, particularly well, or do you like to keep the variety so that you're hitting different audiences in different ways?
Yeah, the one that's performed the best numbers wise in terms of cheapest leads, highest conversion into paid offers, is one that's actually not even it's not even attracting the right clients for my business now. It's one for launching a podcast.
Right.
And I predominantly work with business owners. Now, not everyone who's launching a podcast is a business owner. I get a lot of hobbyists, a lot of people who are like, I want to start a storytelling podcast for fun. And those people end up buying, or they come through that masterclass, they buy my podcast launch plan, and then they're on my email list. So even though that has been the best revenue generating funnel, it hasn't been necessarily the most effective for business growth.
Right.
Yeah.
What have you changed in the last, say 12 months? Because things constantly change, and whether it's algorithms or whether the way that ad networks work, whatever, what have you had to change to keep adapting?
Yeah, I mean, it's more of I think the change that I've made has been more intrinsically driven than what's been going on in the world outside, on the business world as a whole. It's been trying to do less and being really intentional about why are we doing this extra thing when we've got so many other things that we could just do a little bit better, rather than constantly adding new offers, adding new lead magnets, doing more, which is, I think, as an entrepreneur, that's kind of like the natural tendency, is to try and add more rather than look at what we've already created and ask ourselves, how can we improve that?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, shiny idea, I'm going to create this thing. And then suddenly you've created a business that's messy. And I mean, I've definitely found myself there at points. And then I've had to sort of backtrack and prune the things that needed to be removed and streamline things a little bit. So those have been the more recent changes.
Do you think it comes from fear? Because a lot of us, you're worried that the music will stop on this thing, so you need to have the other things going as well?
I think an element of it, yes. An element of that, and also an element of, I get bored so easily. I know you do as well. And whenever I get bored, it's on to the next thing.
Yeah.
I'll do something new. Great, shiny idea, done. That was easy. What's the next challenge? So I think that's a huge part of it as well.
Yeah. How do you see your business in that long-term context? Do you see it in that long-term constant learning context? Because we are constant learners. We need that constant challenge, or we get... Do you think, what does this look like in 5 years' time? Yeah. Have you got to that point yet?
It's constantly changing. My vision of what it looks like in 5 years' time is constantly changing. And especially with how fast AI is growing, there is a very real threat that, none of us will have businesses in 5 years from now. And none of us will have jobs 5 years from now. We'll all be sitting around while AI does all the work for us. Like, that is one very real hypothesis of how it's going to happen. So
what do you think will really happen though?
I don't know. I wish I knew.
Are you more on that side, or do you think it'll just lead to more opportunity?
I think it's probably going to change the way that we do business a lot. And I don't necessarily know if that's going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Is what I can say. So as a result of that, I'm very much open to my 5-year vision changing all the time. And every time I think about it, it changes a little bit. What I do now in my business is probably going to look very different in 5 years' time. And I'm kind of happy with that, because I think if we're so fixed on having that one vision, then when things change and when the environment changes, then it's like, oh no, crisis control, rather than being like, oh, well, this is just what happens. The world changes and cool, let's be flexible and pivot.
Correct me if I'm wrong, you probably did that around a lot of the content you're putting out around Web3.
Yes.
And yeah, so, well, and look, I've had to, kill things really quickly. So I didn't want to keep investing in it over time. And I don't, talk me through the process of that, where you were making lots of content and then you step back from it.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that drove that was just, it's like Web3, the whole crypto world is very much a bear market at the moment. People don't really want to talk about it. So it like development, like investment in there's slowed down. They've kind of, I think a lot of people have redirected investment from Web3 into now AI. So that was purely just okay, great, this is where the market's shifting. So, and maybe this isn't going to be as relevant for my audience as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And maybe it will be, but just not right now.
Yeah. View video, and I'm just going to go back to my questions. If you were to start again today, what would you do differently? Or maybe putting it in another context, if you're starting out with the same business, would you start a podcast? Would you focus on your mailing list? What are the building blocks that are essential for small business owners going out there and creating a new business?
I would absolutely, email list would be number one, especially with social media algorithms and the state of them at the moment, and historically as well, we've seen they all trend downwards as more and more people come onto the platform. As people start posting more, the algorithms need to find a way to discern between good content and bad content and what you want to see, so they can keep you on your platform scrolling more. So I would probably focus less on social media. And to be honest, I still currently I toy with the idea of just stopping Instagram altogether. I'm like, I don't really want to. It doesn't deliver the return that email does for the effort. So email list, I'd probably start a podcast or a YouTube channel, and I would think about where am I reaching people outside of the podcast and YouTube channels. The podcast and YouTube channel would serve to nurture people and to drive them onto my email list, but where else am I reaching people outside of that? Okay,
so you're very good at building community around your brand and that connection. What are those other options? Because a lot of people start a podcast, a lot of people do video, and then what's the missing link between that and getting people to actually care?
It's not. It's the human part. It's not the how-tos. It's not the tips and tricks. It's the, hey, this is my story, or this is my perspective on it, and it might be an unpopular opinion, but this is what I think. And then, it's going to be a little bit more polarizing, and it feels way more uncomfortable to share that kind of content than it does to share 3 steps to start a podcast.
Yeah.
Right? But the 3 steps to start a podcast it's generic. AI can copy that now. And the stories and the perspectives, the experiences, that can't be replicated by AI, not authentically anyway. So it's like, well, that's the human element. That's the bit that's going to make somebody decide, I could be friends with that person, or I feel seen and understood by that person, so now I'm going to go and try and work with them, find out how I can work with them, or take that extra step and get onto their email list and be in their brand world. Yeah.
Is that what works for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Historically, yes.
You invest a lot in your own development as well, and you have. Who are the people you look up to? And I guess, do you have a mentor, or do you have multiple kind of mentors or mentees, or how do you go about looking after yourself? And
It's funny because for the first time in a long time, I haven't worked with a coach in a very long time. I'm in a bit of a phase where I'm learning lots of different things from lots of different people and kind of picking and choosing from different mentors rather than choosing to work with one for an extended period of time. And I think it's actually been really beneficial for me. I was saying to you before we started recording, like I've started doing a master's in neuroscience this year, because even though I don't directly know yet how that's relevant to what I do, there's something in me that's like, that's relevant to what I do. I'm doing, at its core, even though I'm working with people to grow their businesses, there's a behavior change element in there. And that is the thing that I see over and over again, is people getting stuck because they know what they need to do, but they just can't do it. So there's that side of like, I'm trying to learn more, because the more that I can learn, the more I can help people. Having said that though, I work with psychologists. That's, for me, has been like one of the best kind of mentorship relationships that I've had, because it's an hour a couple of times a month where I can just word vomit.
Yeah.
and somebody has to listen to me. And it's great. It helps me
My
to assemble my
guy
thoughts.
says, Mike, hit me with it. It's literally that, yeah.
So who do I look up to though? That changes all the time. That's a very difficult question, because a few years ago I would have said I look up to the Amy Porterfields and the James Wedmores, and I still look up to them. I'm still so impressed by what they do. But whether I would consider that I'm trying to build a business like theirs, I would say probably not.
Yeah. I think we have different seasons in life as well, and these things constantly change. I know recently for myself, like I've go through periods where I don't engage a lot with business related thought or learning. I don't want to learn anymore. I think a lot of us get to that point. We just get tired, and I want to read sci-fi or watch, games of football. I don't want to learn about branding, marketing, or business. And then there are other times where I need to drink from that well. Recently, I've been jumping back into Gary Vee and others because I wanted the energy and I wanted that really directness as well. I guess if you're like, we spoke about, those hard times, but a lot of people are really lonely in business, and they don't have that other person. Sometimes they don't have that other person to speak to. Like, what do you do then?
You have to get out there and find those people. It wasn't that when I started a business, I instantly had all these friends who had businesses.
Yeah.
It was through going to the events, through reaching out to people online. It was this person's followed me, they've also got a business. Oh, they're also in Brisbane. Let me message them and see if they want to catch up for a coffee or a wine or lunch. That's how those friendships have been built. And it's so hard. Like, as an introvert, it's the scariest thing to do, to go and put yourself out there and meet up with a stranger off the internet. It sounds, when I say it like that, it sounds dangerous. It's
well, I get
not.
it. Yeah.
But then, once you've got that, like the first one or the first two friends, then suddenly it's, let's go to a networking event together. And then you meet more people. And then they introduce you to their friends. And it becomes, you find yourself in a new community. Like, the community that I'm in now is so different to what I was in 7 years ago when I first started my current business, where it was, I don't know anyone else who's doing what I'm doing or similar to what I'm doing. And now so many people around me are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's so nice to have that community. So, if you're feeling alone, you got to just reach out to somebody and start getting the ball rolling. As scary as it feels, chances are that person's probably also feeling a little bit alone. So if you reach out to them, then suddenly there's two of you who are a little bit less alone.
Through your own journey in business, and it's what you do, you help other business owners better use their time and sometimes free up their time. But there comes the boredom of that, or the need to fill that space. So what's my question? Where do you think there will always be a need to fill that space?
The space of the free time and
the free time, because it's funny, we aspired to have this, and over the last few years I remember every time we've caught up I said, how you going, Steph? And Steph's like, I've got it under control. Like in a lot of work respects, like I'm not working that much in terms of hours. I've got that under control. But so how do you? This is a better question. How do you deal with your own success when you've actually used your time, you've built up an income that ticks the boxes for you? What's that next step?
Yeah, it's really hard because it's like having that free time, then I have to resist trying to break things, right? Like when you suddenly got all this extra time, you're like, cool, how can my business entertain me? But actually I've realized it's not about my business entertaining me, it's about finding other things to fill that time. Because I could keep working, I could work more, I could find things to do in my business, but I don't necessarily want to. And for me, it's been things like travel, it's been study outside of business, it's been hanging out with friends, like just doing the things that I actually really enjoy doing outside of work. That's made me realize, this has been worthwhile, because I'm not trying to build a business that frees up my time so I've got more time to work in the business. Yeah. I'm trying to build a business that frees up my time so I've got more time to do the other stuff that I really want to do.
Yeah. What is neuroscience?
It's the science of how our brains work. So all of the like different pathways, all of the different things in your brain. Because if you think about like everything that we are doing, we're doing it because we've done it a million times over. We don't even think about getting up in the morning, driving the car. We don't actively think about those things. And the same happens when it's decision making, when it's procrastinating, when it's all of these things that we have to do on a daily basis in our business, or the things that get in the way on a daily basis in our business. A lot of the time it's happening because it's automatic for us. Like we don't even think about it. So I was really fascinated by how our brains work, what leads us to not do the things that we know we need to do. You know, I'm sure you've had this as well. I've given clients the most perfect strategy and it's like, here are your action steps to implement it. And then they don't implement it.
Yeah.
And it's not because they don't know what to do. It's not because they don't have the resources. It's because something in them is afraid or something in them is like, I can't do this. And that's where I think the brain is actually involved a lot more than we realize. Yeah.
How has it opened your eyes up to the way you process things in the world?
Look, I'm only 6 weeks in.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's been really it's been eye-opening in terms of, oh, it's not my fault. Well, I mean, yes, like I'm responsible for the things that I do, but it's like, oh, this is what's actually going on when I'm about to make this decision and fear is stopping me from making that decision. It's like, oh, that's just part of my brain that's activated now. Like it's just what happens. These things are happening at a level we just are not even aware of. And we can't control
it's really interesting, the consciousness of that. Like part of what, you know, my psychologist talks about all the time is, you know, is taking ownership for the decisions and that you have a choice, right? But even in the context of when maybe you feel like you've got less of a choice, being able to understand why I'm in the kitchen at 11 o'clock at night eating chocolate Easter eggs when I'm not hungry, or like why I wake up on a Monday morning and I'm like anxious compared to a Wednesday morning when I'm not, at least gets that conscious element in your brain starting to process actually what's going on here. Yeah. Absolutely.
And like little things like, oh, I don't really need the licorice all sorts that I'm craving at 3 p.m. I just kind of want a bit of a dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Like knowing those things and almost being able to like objectively label it as that has been really useful.
So, I mean, you had your ADHD diagnosis now about 18 months or so?
Yeah, about
maybe
18 months, 2 years ago.
Yeah. That's really interesting, that dopamine bit, because it's just something I'm trying to get to terms with, hence being in the kitchen at 11 o'clock eating chocolate. Yes. Like the constant dopamine chasing. How do you measure that though?
That's a really interesting question. So I think I can kind of tell when the dopamine levels are a little bit low. When I'm like, I go through phases, and there's times when I get that dopamine hit from work. And then there are times when I maybe get it from work and it's probably not the healthiest thing. It's the times when I'm like, oh, I'm going to leave everything to the last minute, or I'm going to try this brand new idea, even though I've got a million other things on my plate right now, but I just want to do that one shiny thing because it's a fun distraction. So I do go through phases where I'm getting a lot of it from work. I go through phases when work's just not satisfying that, and then it's like, cool, let me start eating sugar again, let me book another trip so I've got something to look forward to. So I don't know if it's something I can really measure, but I can definitely identify like the ebbs and the flows of it.
So lots of ebbs and flows in life and business. What's the hardest bit about doing it by yourself?
Ooh, the hardest bit about doing it by myself, I mean, I don't know if I really do it by myself anymore. Like my team is so ingrained in my business that it doesn't feel like I'm doing it by myself. And it's almost as if the decisions I make, I have to think of them now as how are we impacted by it, rather than what do I want to do? What's the impact for me? And that's been a huge shift for me. So that's probably been one of the hardest things, is realizing like, oh, there are other people that I'm now responsible for. I have that sense of responsibility for my team, also for my audience, my community. Like I've built quite a big community, and a lot of them look up to me. So now every time I put a podcast episode out, every time I send an email out, everything that I say, I have to think about what is the impact of this on the person who's receiving that information. So I think, the responsibility.
How do you deal with the anxiety of that? Because I struggle with it.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at squashing it down, which is maybe not the healthiest coping mechanism. Yeah, that's honestly how I deal with it.
Yeah, but you are very mindful, right? But
Yeah.
you put so much out there that there's a lot of opportunity for self-critique. I struggle with that all the time. Let alone everyone else's critique, but your own self-critique. When you're sitting there, you put, 3 podcasts, 3 a week? 3 a week out. You hit social media, you do all the things, you're out there, you face, and yet you're an introvert, who's...
Yeah.
It's not a natural thing. You're not doing it for attention either. How do you measure that, and find that balance there?
I'm very much removed from that process now, in that all I really do is outline the episode and record the episode, and then my team makes sure the rest of it happens.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not even as much of like a conscious process of I'm recording an episode, then I'm putting it out there, and then I'm sharing it on social media. Like, I barely even log into my business Instagram account anymore because my team schedules the things, they go out on there. So in some way, I think, I have removed myself from a little bit. I do sometimes wonder if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because it's nice to not have the constant self-critique of, oh, is this going to be good enough? Should I publish it? Should I edit it 3 more times? But then at the same time, it does also remove a bit of that human connection element, which I have noticed I do feel is missing a little bit now compared to the early days of my business, where I was the one replying to every DM, every email. I was replying to all the comments, whereas now I'm removed from that. So I don't often get to see the actual human impact that that's having.
Yeah, interesting. I think, being here, sharing like you do, does that though. And do we need to show up all the time? Do we need to show all of ourselves as well?
Well, I don't believe so. There are some people who will say yes, absolutely, but I'm not a big fan of that. For me, I've tried. I go through bursts where I'm like, I'm going to show up more on Instagram stories. I'm going to share a little bit behind the scenes, and I do it for about a week, not even a week, like 3 days. And then I realize, actually, this doesn't feel good. I don't want to be the person who's sitting at dinner with my friends, pulling out my phone, being like, hey guys, I've just got to take a photo of our dinner before we can eat.
Yeah.
That's not me. And for some people, that's fine for them. They enjoy that. It's just not a thing for me.
Yeah, I feel it. And part of me thinks it's performative as well. I struggle with that performativeness versus, authentic, because I like to make things that have some kind of value and impact. Or what's the point? It's if it's just attention, that's fine. Attention's pretty important, but I've never been able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the counter argument to that is, of course, if I'm building an online business, it's given me the freedom to live offline and enjoy my life offline, then the content that I'm sharing is inspirational to the other people who are building a business.
Sure.
They want that business that gives them the freedom to travel, to do all of the things, which I totally understand. Like, if I was to share more of my life outside of my business on social media, then that would be inspiring to those people. But it's just like, when I'm not at my laptop, I don't want to be thinking about, I need to post this on social media. That's not why I started my business.
What's actually working for you in terms of best platform at the moment?
Probably the podcast. Well, podcast and email. It's really hard to say which one's better, because they both kind of they both need each other.
Yeah.
The podcast for me is where I can show up and share that content regularly, and then the email is where I can sell to my audience. And one without the other, I don't think would work very well. The reason, but that's also not to say that everyone should go and start a podcast, because the reason the podcast works for me is because that's a format where I've been able to be consistent. I would love to be able to be consistent on YouTube, but for me, the extra step of being on camera to do a podcast is just too much extra work. Yeah. And I did that for a while, and occasionally I still do the video versions when I can be bothered, but it's like that extra bit of work that just makes it so much harder. It's the one bit of resistance that stops me from hitting record, and then that stops me from being consistent. So podcast and then email, same. It's because I've been able to be consistent. I've grown that list. I've nurtured them. And I have a team member now who helps me with the emails. So we're sending at least 3 emails a week.
Yeah. You've got what's the right word for it? You've got, in my view, not an aggressive, but a very robust email process. And I delete most emails and it goes to spam, but I always follow your emails, Steph. But you are very, I've seen the change in your email strategy. How do you, how have you learnt with your email copy, with how many emails you actually send out? How have you learnt what actually works, and how do you constantly change that? I
mean, I can see, like in a launch, for example, where we're sending 1, sometimes 2 emails in a day, we can see like, oh, this email's converting, this one's not. And then I always look at like, why did that one convert? So for example, in one launch recently, I started sending an entire email with just one person's case study in it, where the whole email was just, rather than the testimonial being a little afterthought in an email, the email was the story of this person's journey. Those converted really well. So now I know, okay, in the future, how can we add more of that into any time we're selling? Same with emails. So the Monday, Wednesday, Friday emails, they correlate with a new podcast episode. So we can see, well, more people clicked through to listen to the podcast from this email. Is it because the topic is something that more people are interested in? Or is it because of something that we've done there in the actual structure and the wording of the email? Yes, I do send a lot more emails now than I did a few years ago. And part of that was actually just me overcoming this worry of like, oh, what if people unsubscribe? I don't care if people unsubscribe anymore.
Yeah, right.
Like if they don't want to get the emails, because most of the emails I'm sending are still value-adding emails.
Yeah.
If they don't want to get those emails because there are a few sales emails in there, and a couple of times a year they might get 1 email a day for 7 days, then you know what? That's fine. They can unsubscribe.
Yeah.
They probably weren't ever going to buy from me in the first place, and they obviously aren't finding that value enough to make up for the sales that they're getting.
Yeah. I agree. I think you put a lot of value into it. It's similar with your podcast. And I'm like, how do you come up with so many podcast episodes? Because,
yes.
Look, having done a couple 100 myself, but I can't imagine doing 3 a week, mate. Like, so how does it happen?
It ebbs and flows. Sometimes there's a lot of inspiration. Other times the well is dry. So twice a year I survey my email list. I will send them a survey and I'm asking them, what are you struggling with? What are your goals at the moment? What's stopping you from reaching those goals? And I always ask them, what 3 questions do you have for me? And then those questions guide ideas for the podcast episodes. I also look at previous episodes. I look at what's performed really well and I think, how can we zoom in or zoom out? So, for example, if I've done 3 ways to grow your email list, I might zoom in and do an episode just focusing on one of those ways. Or I might zoom out and I might look at 3 ways to grow your overall audience. So I'm zooming in, zooming out, different levels of each topic. Sometimes I look at old episodes and I'm like, well, that was a great episode, but it's a bit out of date now. How can I rework that and update it? I've started doing ones where my listeners can write in and ask a question. I've done live coaching ones where students of mine have been coached in a 30-minute episode, and those have been really effective episodes as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not more interview shows?
It's a lot of extra work.
Yeah.
I don't love them as much. I much prefer doing the solo stuff.
Yeah. If you're starting a podcast from scratch, and you made the comment like whether you should or not, what's happening in podcast world? Like there are literally millions of podcasts. How do you get noticed?
It's a tough question because I started my podcast 8 years ago. No, not 8 years ago. 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Feels like 8 years.
I was going to say.
6 years ago.
I didn't start mine 8 years ago.
And when I started it was a very different world. It was so much easier to get that initial listenership. It's obviously very different right now. So I think if I was starting out again, I would be focusing in on a really niche topic. Rather than going broad like I did, I would go quite niche. And I would focus rather than, I need to get as many listeners as possible, it's how can I just make sure I'm getting the right listeners. Download numbers, great. Also a bit of a vanity metric.
Yeah.
You know, like we look at them as a measure, as an indicator of how our show is going, but you can't always compare the download numbers from one show with the download numbers of another show. If you go after a niche audience, you're going to have lower download numbers just because there's a smaller market. But that doesn't mean that those people aren't engaged. That doesn't mean that those people aren't going to buy from you.
Yeah.
So I would be focusing on niche audience, not worrying about download numbers, and really thinking about why should somebody listen to this show rather than anything else, because it's not about starting a podcast for the sake of starting a podcast. If you can't articulate why somebody should choose to listen to your show over somebody else's show, then you're going to really struggle to grow it.
Yeah. When we started our podcast back, must be almost 7 years ago, it was to make something valuable. And I've been going through that thought process a lot, and this is what I want to do with this video series. I want to create something that people, you know, look forward to every week. And that's how I do with podcasts. I guess that's coming from, again, giving value as opposed to just sales. Do you foresee, like, you rebranded your podcast? That's probably something interesting. Like, how did that process go? How successful was the rebrand, and what drove it?
Yeah, so the rebrand was from a name which it was really cute when I started the name, Socialette. I was like, oh, it's bite-sized social media, Socialette. But then when I started talking less and less about social media and more about general business strategy, it was no longer relevant. And I was also getting people asking me, how do you spell that? So whenever I was on a podcast interview, whenever I was speaking on a stage and I told people to tune into my podcast, people didn't know how to spell that.
Yeah, right.
So that became that was a little bit of a hindering factor to the growth. And then I thought, when I came to renaming it and coming up with a new name, I thought, well, what's been the secret to my business growth? Oh, Imperfect Action. That's where the name came from.
Yeah. Perfect. And look, when you told me the name, I thought, brilliant.
Yeah, it's a great name.
It was spot on. How did you land a sponsor like Hubspot?
I reached out to them. I asked.
Wow.
Yeah, I noticed that they were sponsoring other business podcasts, and I got in pretty early. And I think now there's a formal application process, but I asked and I spoke to a few people, and I didn't hear back for a couple of months. And I thought, oh, they've probably decided they don't want to have my show on their network. That's fine. And then I heard back from them, and suddenly I was in the network, and then suddenly I was speaking on stage at their annual conference, Inbound, of the same event that Obama was speaking at.
Wow.
Not the same day, not the same stage, but still the same event. And I was like, you get what you ask for, right? Like, I almost didn't reach out and ask because I thought, well, my show is so much smaller than the ones that they're sponsoring. But at that time when I reached out, they were looking to grow and take on some more smaller shows. So it just happened to be really good timing, and the fact that I asked.
What's been the effect of having, because once I saw it, look, your credibility is very high with me, but I suspect that people's credibility went through the roof with you.
Credibility, but also audience growth, because one part of that is we do cross promos every month.
Yeah.
So I'm promoting somebody else's show in the network, and then somebody else is promoting my show in the network.
Right.
So it's a great way of reaching those new people who are business owners, because that's what their core audience is business owners, reaching other business owners, and then, being cross-promoted on shows like The Hustle and, My First Million, that's been wild.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're the launch queen. You built a business around launching things, products, services, new offers. What do people generally get wrong when they look to launch something?
Do we have like an hour for this? I think the biggest thing people get wrong is they don't take into account how somebody makes a decision to buy or not. They think, I'm creating a course and somebody's going to buy it because it's really exciting and it has lots of modules and lots of hours of video content. They don't think about the fact that somebody is buying a course maybe because they have a problem they want to solve. Or they don't think about the fact that the person who's deciding to buy that course that solves their problem has questions. They have to go through a bit of an internal decision-making process before they are confident that this is going to be the thing that's going to solve the problem for them. So often when I see people I'm going to use courses as an example because it's just an easy one. When I see people launching a course for the first time, they're like, oh, I've made this course and this is what it's about, and it's got 8 modules, and in each module's 5 lessons, and you get a weekly live Q&A call. And they're like, it's so much value. I've spent months creating it. There's so much information in there. But nowhere in there have they told me what that's going to do for me. Nowhere in there have they told me that this is going to work for me in my particular situation. So when somebody's looking to buy, they're thinking, is this going to work for me? And if you haven't addressed that, then they're not going to buy from you. So in a launch, the whole focus is around content that's moving somebody to that point where they are ready to buy from you. And then once you open doors, once you start selling to them, it's giving them the information they need to make that decision. Yeah.
So it's not about value per se.
No, like value, we think value sells, but I could drive past the Audi dealership and see an Audi half price, and that's great value. And I know it's great value, and I'd love to have an Audi, but I'm not going to go and buy it because I don't need a new car.
Right.
So it's not value that drives the decision-making process.
Yeah. So what happens when launches fail? Like, what do you do? Because I've had a few.
Yeah.
Like, how have you processed it yourself?
Yeah.
And what do people need to be mindful of?
I mean, and this is the thing, like it's normal to have launches that fail. Like I know the strategy behind how to launch properly, and I've still had ones that have flopped. And that's not necessarily that people don't want what I'm launching. There's usually some kind of mismatch between how I've communicated the offer and what they really needed, or how they understand it, how they perceive the problem that they're experiencing. Or it might be that it's just bad timing. So I always find out. I reach out to the people who viewed the sales page and didn't buy, and I ask them, what made you decide not to buy?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's timing. They'll say, well, right now it's the school holidays and I can't commit to showing up to live calls for 4 weeks. Great. Okay, let me try launching that again after school holidays are over. It might be that they tell me, oh, I didn't think it was for me because of this reason. And then I can say, well, actually it was for them. Maybe I just need to address that better in my sales copy next time.
Right.
So I'm understanding where that misalignment was.
Have you ever thrown courses out that just didn't work?
Absolutely. I typically don't create a course before I've launched it now. So I'll launch it first, and then if people buy it, I will teach it week by week, rather than spending months and months outlining it, because you just don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. You don't know what combination of messaging. You don't know what you don't know anything until you actually do it.
Yeah.
Even the teaching component, like you don't know where the students are going to get stuck, and where you need to maybe spend 2 weeks on something you thought you need to spend 1 week on, and vice versa. So, yeah, like. I have retired courses though, so I used to have a Facebook ads course.
Yeah, I did it.
Yeah, it was a great course, but the reason I retired it was because ads just kept changing all the time, and I wasn't passionate enough about ads to constantly be learning about them and constantly be updating that course.
Yeah. What is the future of courses? Because you mentioned the AI question. Just seems to me that information is less valuable.
But courses aren't about information. A good course is about application. Right? It's about how you can get somebody to take that action. It's, again, coming back to the behavior change thing, right? It's an element that every course has an element of behavior change. If you are creating a course or any kind of digital product in your business where you're focused on just giving them the information, that's not valuable. It might feel like it's valuable because you're giving them all this stuff and you're like, oh, I've recorded so many hours of, but that's not the stuff that adds the value. The stuff that adds the value is how can we get them to take that action and get the result, and do that as quickly as possible.
Yeah. What was your biggest flop with the course?
So I had one that I was launching in late 2019, and I had 700 people registered for the webinar, and I was excited to go live with the webinar, and when I clicked the little go live button, spinning wheel, and it froze. So I couldn't get into the webinar room. I had all these people registered. I had angry people emailing me saying I can't get in. I've put my child to bed early so I could be here for this, and like I've got up early to watch this webinar, and they couldn't get in. So that was a pretty awful flop. It was also, I invested pretty much the last of my savings into running Facebook ads to get those 700 people registered.
Yeah.
And suddenly I wasn't going to be able to sell this course that I'd created the webinar for. So that was
So
pretty bad.
you went home?
I went home, yeah. I saw you in the kitchen of the co-working space. Then I went home, poured myself a large glass of wine, climbed into bed, and started looking for jobs.
Yeah.
As you do.
So what was the point but you turned up the next day?
Yes. So
Yeah.
this was, to bring it full circle, right? This was where I messaged my good friend and I said to her, have you ever thought about, do you ever just look for jobs? Do you ever want to quit your business so badly you look for jobs? And she called me and she walked me through step by step. You're going to send everyone who registered for the webinar this email, and then you're going to reschedule it, and you're going to do that, and you're going to do that, and you're going to do that. And I managed to salvage it. I think I had 8 people buy the course in the end, which wasn't a great number by any means, but it was better than none.
Yeah. What's been the biggest struggle, Steph, in business in the last few years for you?
Focus, I think. It's been, as somebody who constantly wants to do all of the different things, it's been so hard to focus on the things that I know move the needle the most, especially because once you do something long enough, it gets a little bit boring. The fact that I've been able to stick with a podcast for as long as I have, for 800 episodes, is the most committed I've ever been to anything.
What's your biggest win? Is it that?
Probably, yeah. I think it probably has been that, to be honest. That and the fact that I've built something that I didn't think this was possible, what I've built. Even though I wanted to do it, I knew that was what I was setting out to do. There was always this part of me that thought it's not actually possible for me to create a business that is profitable, that allows me to travel, that does all the things I want it to.
Yeah. What does self-esteem mean for you?
Oof. I think for me it means just knowing that I'll be able to figure it out. Even when business throws challenges, when life throws challenges, when energy's low, when things are not good, it's okay, cool. Whatever this is, I will be able to figure it out. Whatever tough decision, whatever change, anything, it's it might suck right now, it might be really uncomfortable right now, but I know that I've got this. I think that's what it means, yeah.
We were recently at an event and we won some books. and you'd read a few of them. And it got me to thinking, what are 3 books, maybe, or a couple of books that you think would be valuable to people like us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Mountain Is You is probably my most recommended book ever. It's, when you look at the cover and it says transform self-sabotage into self-mastery, and you might be like, oh, I don't self-sabotage. We all do it. It's a great book for that. What else? I've read a lot of books. I love Atomic Habits. I think that never gets old. And I'm trying to think what's a recent one that's been good. Seth Godin's The Dip as well. I know you're a big Seth fan as well. The Dip's a pretty good one about persisting through the lull. So whenever you start a creative project and it's exciting and then you get to that dip, and how when you persist through that dip, that's where the magic is on the other side. And then as a completely random, unexpectedly good leadership book, QF32, about the captain and the pilots on the flight that had all of these things go wrong. Wow. It's a great leadership book. I didn't pick it up thinking this is going to be a leadership book, but it ended up being a great leadership book. Yeah,
I love books with a story that end up taking you through and teaching you that. I've read a fair few. I think one when I started out in fitness 20 odd years ago, Born to Run, which was just this story about this guy running through South America and Mexico with no shoes on, and it was just amazing. It was back when it was the no shoe kind of thing was going on, but it really inspired me to start running, and then that started martial arts, and that started jiu-jitsu and everything like that. I'm interested in the first book you mentioned. How are you religious at all? Are you spiritual, or have you been in your life?
No, I mean, yes and no. I was brought up, I went to a religious school, but it's funny because I know so many people who had religious upbringings who have just the worst experience of it, and my experience of religion was great. Like our Rev in chapel used to tell Winnie the Pooh stories. Like it was great. But having said that, I'm not particularly religious. Maybe a little bit more spiritual. I think like I love to believe that there is something, the universe or something greater than us, as I think most people do. Like it's nice to know that it's not just us. Like when there's something else guiding us, it does take a little bit of that pressure off in a way where you're like, oh, I can just kind of, it'll be okay.
Yeah. What does the future hold for Steph Taylor? Where are you off to next on your travels of the world?
Well, I'm taking a sabbatical this year. Whoops. I'm taking a sabbatical this year. I've decided, I've been doing this business for 7-8 years. I'm going to take a bit of an extended break to just think.
Yeah.
Like I've been so caught up in, even though I've been able to have that time away from my business, even though I don't actually need to be at my desk that many hours each week, I haven't had uninterrupted thinking time for a long, long time. So I'm going to take a couple of months off and get a van, drive around, travel around, and see what happens, see what's next. I don't really know what's next, but it'll come to me while I'm driving.
Well, you've done a great van adventure before, right? But that was only a short amount of time.
That was,
relatively.
that was 3 years ago now.
Right.
And it was only a month long. And during that 1 month, I had so many ideas, so many reflections. So I want that, but longer. Yeah.
Have you come across the Leave Everything and Wander?
No.
So look for them on YouTube. They're an amazing couple, an Italian couple. And they basically did the van life. There's lots of van life people on YouTube, but they are special in my heart because they just documented it all. They've got this beautiful daughter now, and they've actually bought a place in Sicily and they're doing it up. But beautiful and a really cool thing. I think you'd love it.
Yeah, I have to look at that.
Well, Steph, thank you again. You were the first person I ever interviewed on any kind of podcast, and every time a new project rolls around. But I really appreciate it. It was really good to talk about, how you go about things and how you process it. Hold on, I'll cut that out. Hold on, I'm just blabbering on. Steph, thank you, my friend, for coming on the show again. Whatever becomes of this, it's always great to hear your insights.
Thank you for having me again. I mean, I've lost count of how many times you've interviewed me, but it's always great to be a guest on your show, so thank you.
Thanks,